Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's amazing to see so many people here. Thanks so much for coming today. Hello and welcome to Carnegie Mellon, welcome to the Tepper School, and welcome to the Schwartz Center. For those of you that I haven't seen before, I'm Isabelle Bageux, and I'm the Dean of the Tepper School. It is really a pleasure to see everyone here today. And thank you so much for joining us for this new leadership speaker series. Who among you have already shopped at Giant Eagle or Market District before? I guess everybody, right? So it is, they are one of the Western Pennsylvania's largest family-owned businesses. Well, today's important and timely discussion will explore the success and innovation at Giant Eagle. In just a few minutes, you'll meet daughter and father duo, Laura Shapira Karet and David Shapira. Laura and David are two of the region's most luminary family business leaders. And I'm really happy to share that David also serves on our CMU Board of Trustees. Not only have Laura and David served our community, but they also very generously continue to give their time, their energy, and resources to Carnegie Mellon. We're so thankful for their time, and I'm looking forward to engaging in an intimate conversation about the growth and success of Giant Eagle. Their dialogue today kicks off a new family business leadership series developed by entrepreneurship faculty member Meredith Meyer-Grelly, who's standing right here. Meredith is going to introduce you to the series now, and I'm really happy to give her the mic.
Look at all these beautiful faces. Holy smokes. It was an intimate conversation. That was the idea. It sort of exploded. So it's wonderful to see students here. It's wonderful to see community members here too, and Giant Eagle friends as well. Thank you. A huge thank you to Isabelle for supporting this family business series, and to the incomparable Dave Mawhinney, director of the Schwartz Center, who supported this series as well as the larger family business initiative that we've launched recently. Finally, thank you to Alex, Sonia, Allison, who've done all the hard work, pulled all the extra chairs out to make this happen today, and to the Giant Eagle team, who's really put a lot of time into gathering all the communications for this event. So as a family business owner myself, I have a particular affinity for the kind of business that our two esteemed speakers own and operate. And I'm just going to leave you with a couple facts today. Family businesses, those in this room, we know how important they are. They account for somewhere between 65 and 80% of global enterprises. In the US, they account for half of GDP. Family businesses employ half of our workforce. So we are incredibly lucky to have these two most innovative business owners and leaders here to talk about this part of our economy today. As Isabelle mentioned, this talk kicks off a three-part leadership speaker series. The next talk is on February 7th. That will be with Stephanie Hickman, who owns and runs Trice Construction in Chicago. She has taken this business from her uncles and grown it into a formidable force in the Midwest. She's currently building the Obama Presidential Library on the south side of Chicago. She'll be coming in on February 7th. On March 22nd, we will have Emily Sheets, who leads strategy for her family company. She has a particular focus on innovation and technology. Once you get out of get-go territory and move eastward across the state, you may find yourself at one of her travel centers. And finally, in January, we're really excited to launch peer advisory groups for family business owners. This will bring together family business owners from our own community, students, alums, as well as beyond our community. If you're interested in being a part of a peer advisory group with other family business owners, we will be sending out more information after this event, including a link where you can fill out some information about yourself so we can help get you situated in that program. Some logistics: there is a boxed lunch that will await you at the end of this talk. You'll be able to grab it right outside that door. And we are being recorded today, and we'll share that link out on the Family Business site, which lives on the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship's website. And now, with no further ado, I am so pleased to announce our amazing MBA and Swartz Fellow, Ghazal Makur, and she is also from a family business. So, Ghazal, thank you. Come on up.
Thank you so much, Meredith. So before you hear from Laura and David themselves, I would just like to say a few words and introduce them. So starting with Laura Shapira Karet is an inspiring retail leader. She's the chair and CEO of Giant Eagle. And in this role, she has really led the company's expansion and introduction to the Indiana market, grew GetGo through ground up and acquisition, launched and evolved online ordering and delivery services, and championed a bold, sustainable platform. Most significantly, she has also architected and is leading a foundational transformation that will position the enterprise for growth and continued future success. She is also deeply committed to community economic and workforce development, food insecurity, and early childhood education. She is a trustee of the Brookings Institution and the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board. She's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the chair of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development, and an active member on the board of directors of various organizations, and the list goes on and on. She's a native of Pittsburgh, and she graduated from Amherst College with a bachelor's degree in English, and resides in Pittsburgh area with her husband and 3 children. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today. Now, David Shapira positioned Giant Eagle during his 30-plus years as chairman and CEO officer and president as an industry leader, and grew the company from a local chain of 50 stores to an organization now with more than 425 locations and approximately $9.5 billion in revenue. He's a Pittsburgh native with an undergraduate degree from Oberlin College and a master's degree in economics from Stanford University. He joined Giant Eagle back in 1970, a company that was founded by his grandfather with 4 others. He was named president and CEO in 1980, and the chairman of Giant Eagle Board of Directors in 1992. He really led the company during its peak years of growth and transformation, and has implemented numerous industry-leading technologies and marketing concepts. And since stepping away from the day-to-day operations of Giant Eagle in 2013, David has really applied the entrepreneurial approach to the world of philanthropy. Through the foundation he leads with his wife, Cindy, he has really led the development of several projects that demonstrate real and meaningful positive impact on the civic challenges of our day. These philanthropic ventures include Onward Israel, which transforms young adults through professional summer internships with Israeli businesses and organizations, and the Comprehensive Excellence Initiative at Hillel International. His civic involvement truly reflects his and Giant Eagle's commitment to advancing and investing in the community that they are serving today. He has also served on numerous corporate and civic boards, including EQT, Mellon Bank, and as Isabel already mentioned, he's also on the board of trustee and past chairman of Carnegie Mellon Investment Committee and a founding co-chairman of the Pittsburgh Promise campaign. Thank you so much, David and Laura, for joining.
You're very impressive.
Now I'll pass it over to Robert, who is a fellow MBA student, second-year student with me, and really interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Is this thing on? Let's test it. Okay, we're good to go? All right. Wow, you know how important you are to a community by the number of introduction speakers you have. So that was impressive and a first time for me. But yeah, without further ado, we definitely want to get to the meat of our discussion today. So thank you one last time for you being here. We're all humbled by your presence and sharing information about your entire career. So to get things started, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the company, including the 5 founding families, and how that unique partnership is still a part of the company today?
That's all you did.
Here we go.
So we are unusual in the sense that some people have been referring to Laura and I as the owners of the company. We're actually not the owners of the company. We're very small shareholders. The company was founded by 5 unrelated immigrant men who came to the United States in the period around 1900. I can speak most, of course, about my grandfather, Laura's great-grandfather, who was one of those 5 men. It's a very unusual setup. They were equal partners in every way. They each owned 20% of the company. They drew equal salaries. As we think of things today, there was never really a boss. They did things by consensus. And my grandfather, just to feature him, although in many ways the other 4 have very similar type stories. My grandfather was actually born here in the United States, right off the boat. He grew up in the Hill District. His mother died in childbirth. His father remarried, and the woman he remarried was sort of the classic evil stepmother. Refused to raise my grandfather, who was then raised by his mother's mother, who passed away when he was 16, leaving him her entire fortune, which was $300. He went to Fifth Avenue High School. He went to work for a wholesale grocery company, met 2 of the other founders while he was out on the road. They invited him to join them, and they actually started a company called Eagle Grocery, which between 1915, which is when he joined them, and 1929, right before the Depression, they built up to a chain of 120 stores. But those are stores that are about half the size of this room, if that big. They sold out to Kroger in 1929. Decided to try going into the shoe business. Either the Depression or the fact that they weren't very good at selling shoes killed that business, probably both. And then the 3 of them joined with 2 other families who had a little company called OK Grocery. And that was really the founding of Giant Eagle. I believe it was 1932. And from there, well, one other interesting part of this, since this is about family businesses, the 5 of them had a rule that they instituted that they could give their stock in the company to all of their children, but they could only bring 1 male child into the business. 1 male son or son-in-law. So a second generation came In our case, we actually are descended from the Goldstein family. In our case, it was a son-in-law who was my father and Laura's grandfather. But in the other 4 families, it was a direct son. They changed the rule so that they could each bring 1 child into the business. So in terms of modern, the way we think about things, modern ways, that was a big change in the history of the business.
You should tell how many daughters that came from that change. It was very modern.
Well, what happened was each of the 5 of them brought in a son. In the Goldstein Shapira family, that was me. They operated under the same philosophy of equality. All 5 of those sons, the second generation, drew the same salary. For many years, there was no boss. They did things, what they considered to be important things, by unanimity solely. If one person voted against it, they didn't do it. Eventually, they made my father the chief executive. And that happened after we started to get executives who were not family members. That's as the company grew. In our family's case, I have 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. I was very happy being a hippie in California. My father wanted somebody to come in the business, so he would offer it to me, then he would offer it to my brother, then he would offer it to my other brother, then he would offer it to my sister. Nobody was interested until Laura came along as a baby, at which point I realized I actually had to have a job. And,
Actually, Dad, I think Mom told you you had to have a job, just to be clear.
I think she's right about that. And actually, to give her mother credit, her mother had 2 things. One was we obviously had to support the children. And by the way, we were not wealthy. Company was not big. We were middle class kinds of people. But her mother contributed something I think even more important, which was it was really not responsible being a parent and raising your children in a hippie atmosphere. And so those things sort of all came together. And as we started to actually think about getting a job, my father was going around that circle for the 3rd or 4th time. Again, what Laura's mother introduced was, if we're going to do this, why not move to a place where we had grandparental influence? And so we made the decision to come back to Pittsburgh, which turned out to obviously be a wonderful decision. I grew up right across Shenley Park from here on a street called Guarino Road. Used to play in the park all the time. And I must say, as life went on and I became involved with CMU and found myself at one point being chairman of the board, I used to think to myself as I sat at that table, how did I get from this middle-class child on the other side of Shenley Park to be sitting at the head of that table? And frankly, I can't explain how it happened.
But can I interject for 1 second? A very Pittsburgh story is that home, until very recently, was owned and lived in by a Giant Eagle team member.
Wow.
Which is like, it's such a Pittsburgh thing.
Anyway, in my generation, there were 4 other sons who came in the business. At some point, I kept getting promoted. Again, not exactly sure why. And what I finally did was I went to the 5 families, and I said, look, they wanted to make me chief executive. And I said, I'd like the job, I want to be chief executive, but you know, the stock is so dispersed that I'm a very, very tiny shareholder. And I want to be paid like an outside chief executive would be paid. And looking backwards, remember this is now, we're now Monday morning quarterbacks when I say this. I think the biggest decision that the families made in the company was to agree to that. So the other 4 families agreed to put me in charge of their own children and to pay me much more than they were paying their own children. How that happened, I'm not exactly sure. But again, looking back as a Monday morning quarterback, it worked. And that's when we started our really big growth. I think I joined the company in 1970, and I think I got promoted in 78 or 79 or 1980. I can't really remember. But that's when this whole thing started in the modern phase. Until it was time to go to the 4th generation. And it's been a very interesting journey in that I was able to take the company from where it was when I took over to a certain point. And then was clearly time for somebody else. Laura got elected as the new CEO. And Laura, I think you should tell how you came to the company. And she, of course, has transformed it again. So look, we've been very lucky, and somebody says to me, how did we do it? I'm not really all that sure.
Yeah, you definitely stole my thunder. I was going to stay on the company overview, but Laura would love to know how you entered the business and then like the roles that you held and where you're at today.
Well, thank you. So I had no intention of coming back to the business at all. Not because I don't love the business. I love food. I love the business is really, it's part of my DNA, literally. My earliest memories are riding on shopping carts, like on the bottom, which now we won't let people do. And we had a cabin about 60 miles east of Pittsburgh, and we would stop at what was then the Harmerville Giant Eagle, which was a real, excuse my language, piece of crap. And he always had the theory that if it wasn't broken, don't fix it. And I would say when I became CEO, there were a lot of things that really needed to be modernized, but that's a different story. Anyway, but my earliest memories are of the stores. But I'm an ambitious person. I think I'm a talented person. And I didn't want to be the boss's kid. When I would go, I worked in the stores in the summer and a couple summers in the office. And, my dad was revered. People called him chief. My mom, it used to make my mom nuts because she said, you go, David, when you come home at night, you're so used to being treated like a god. Like you have to come back down to earth, and which she did a very good job of. But I wanted to make it for myself. I didn't want to be the person that got the job because of a name or a relationship. I went off to school. There's sort of a funny story about this. I wanted to be my own version of what he's describing as a hippie. And I wanted to go be a ski instructor. And I called him up. He has always been my mentor, but I was talking to him about this job pursuit, and he said, I just want to tell you something. If you go to be a ski instructor, that's the end of any monetary relationship that we have. He said, I strongly advise you to get a real job. So actually, there's a funny follow-on story. So Amherst has, I'm sure, like CMU does, a career office. And I went to Ann Taylor and bought myself a suit which didn't fit very well. And I made a little resume. And at the time, the way that you applied for jobs was they literally stapled manila folders on the wall. And any one you were interested in, you stuck your resume in. So I made my resume and I stuck it in every single manila folder. And Procter & Gamble, I actually didn't know what Procter & Gamble did. But I showed up at the interview, and I have a really strong food background, and I also have a really strong entrepreneurship background. And for whatever reason, they liked me, and they offered me a job. And I so didn't know what Procter & Gamble was that when I flew in for the interview, Procter's headquartered in Cincinnati, but you land in the greater Northern Kentucky airport. And I was convinced I'd gotten on the wrong plane. So, I did my day of interviews. They offered me a job. I called my dad, this is how long ago it was, from the payphone in the lobby of Procter. And I said, what do I do? And he said, you take the job. And so I took the job. I didn't realize at the time, I had no idea. I was an English major. I had no idea what I was doing, but it ended up being, I was in a class of 125 incoming brand assistants, is what they were called at the time. Every single one of them was an MBA, a really fancy MBA. I was one of 4 undergrads. I have great respect for MBA people, so please take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. But, all those guys walked in like they knew what they were doing. And I knew I didn't know anything. I mean, literally, they showed up and they said, this is where you sit and here's your computer. And I was like, great, now what? And so it gave me 2 advantages. One was I didn't know what couldn't be done. So I just did stuff. And it got me noticed. And the other thing was I was smart enough to ask for help. And I really worked hard on building a mentor relationship with some really key people in the company who cared a lot about me and my success, and were willing to spend the time with me to help me think through things. And I got a lot of stuff down. I'll give you a great story about this. So I was too stupid to know that you could sort of negotiate for what brand you were going to get on. So they put me on the Crisco shortening brand, which was by far the worst brand at Procter. I mean, it made a lot of money, but it was not a particularly prestigious brand to be on. But everyone else sort of laughed at me. And I was like, okay, well, I got this brand, Crisco shortening. So what do people do with Crisco shortening? And I'm going to leave the sexual innuendo stuff aside because there's that too. But what people do is they bake and they fry. And what I figured out was that people weren't baking as much with Crisco because we had gotten out of the recipe stream. The people that are food influencers had turned to butter because no one was talking to them about the benefits of Crisco shortening. So what I decided, and Crisco happens to make really, really, really good chocolate chip cookies. So what I decided to do was I hired a bakery, and we made 10,000 chocolate chip cookies, and I sent them to every food editor in the United States. And the day after I did that, which I thought was a pretty smart idea, the day after I did that, I got called up to the 11th floor, which is where all the muckety-muck sits. And I was literally shaking in my boots because getting called to the 11th floor was not good. And the general counsel was sitting there. He said, Ms. Shapira, I understand that you have sent chocolate chip cookies to every food editor in North America. I said, yes, I did. He said, did you have them tested? I said, for what? They're chocolate chip cookies. And I got a big talking to because, I didn't know anything about testing for food safety. That never even occurred to me. So I got yelled at, but it worked. And what ended up happening was the food editors started publishing recipes about Crisco shortening, and the business started to grow. And that's sort of just an example of like not being too stupid to know what you can and can't do. Sometimes gives you entrees into things that other people wouldn't do, and sometimes they work. But in any case, so I had a prosperous career at Procter. Procter is a spectacular training ground in that it is. It literally is an ivory tower for brand strategy. There was none of the entrepreneurship. They didn't teach entrepreneurship. In fact, they taught exactly the opposite of entrepreneurship, which was if it hasn't worked somewhere else in the world, it's a really bad idea. At some point, when I got promoted to a very prestigious brand, which was Secret Deodorant, which was one of the top assignments in the company. It made a lot of money, growing. I got called in and they said, Laura, we're happy to have you be the brand manager of this company, or this brand, and you have one job. Don't screw it up. And I was thinking, well, that is not, for me, it's not particularly motivational because I like to grow things. I like to try things. And that led me to say it's time to go do something else. And I followed a mentor of mine to Sara Lee Bakery, which was exactly the opposite of Procter & Gamble, in that you wanted something done, you got it done by yourself. And we reinvented, I know this sounds really silly, but it was very meaningful to me at the time. I spent a lot of time thinking about cheesecake. We reinvented the cheesecake business, and we did it with no money and basically duct tape and coat hangers. And I spent a lot of time on the shop floor in Iowa making cheesecakes. And lo and behold, and by the way, I didn't do any food safety testing there either. But there they didn't care. It was a different environment. And it worked. And at the time, so I was very happy. I was having a lot of fun. I was growing businesses. I was getting to be an entrepreneur. I was getting to innovate. I loved being in Chicago. And I met my now husband, who was a practicing attorney in one of the big firms there, who hated what he was doing. He was an M&A attorney, and he wanted to be doing deals, not being the guy saying why deals can't get done. And along this time, my dad started making the rounds that he described my grandfather making, and saying it's time for people, A, I would like some grandkids. That got very loud and persistent. B, we have a head of marketing job open, and you should take it. And I was like, don't want to be the boss's kid. Just don't want to do it. So he got smart and offered my husband a job. And it was in 1999, which was right as the first internet boom was happening, right before the bubble burst. And he offered my husband the idea that they'd start a fund together and go invest in technology, which my husband said yes to without consulting me. By the way, we just bought a house. I mean, it was so I moved to Pittsburgh, and I guess I would make a couple comments about it. I've had a wonderful career at Giant Eagle, partially because I have the benefit of having my dad be my mentor. Having access to someone who has been there and done that, and the way his mind works. I mean, it's a huge advantage. It's just a huge advantage in so many different ways. I could go into his office, and I never took, for example, a basic accounting class. I was an English major, so I'm a pretty good student. But I'd hear terms that I'd never heard of before. And I'd walk in and I'm like, can you explain that to me? And having someone like him to explain some of that stuff to you is pretty good. It's been a wonderful choice also because I love the business so much. What my dad didn't touch on was, it's a very rare, I'm not aware of any other family business that has 5 families involved that's survived into the 5th generation. It's a really unique thing. There are family businesses that are multi-generational, but typically not with more than one family. And having 5 families is complicated. What he didn't mention was, at least in my opinion, the glue that has kept us together. Is that the 5 founding fathers had a really strong shared sense of values about what being in business meant. And they came, it's a classic American immigrant story. I mean, these guys came with nothing. And they created something that was not only enough to support their families, not in any sort of huge way, but they felt it's a Jewish tradition that you leave the world a better place than what you found it. And that value, that set of values, has held us together because we're not in it. We view our shareholders as stakeholders, and we view that our shareholders are only one of 4 stakeholders. One is our team members, one is our customers, one is our community, and the shareholders believe that if you do the right thing for the first 3, good things happen to them, which is a wonderful environment and platform from which to lead, particularly when you're in a business that is so elemental and so important. I find it very gratifying to be able to lead a company that is more than about just making money. Now, we're clearly capitalists, and we actually hold ourselves to public company standards. Sometimes I think we go overboard from that perspective. And the board holds me accountable to EBITDA growth and all of those things. But what makes me excited is not just looking at the profit line go up. It's doing things like the mobile market that we have and being able to be in a position where we're feeding people that can't afford to shop in our stores. So it has been, for me, I'm going to echo what he said about my mother. Raising my kids in a place where we're surrounded by family is a wonderful thing. And my husband, although the venture thing didn't work out, has a very successful real estate company that's sort of affiliated with Giant Eagle, and he's very happy. And we love living here. So it's been a good choice. I will tell you, I still deal with the crap sometimes about being the boss's kid. And, in a lot of ways we're alike. In a lot of ways we are very different. I get blamed for some things just because I'm the kid, and people assume that I'm like him. And I get credit for stuff I probably don't deserve. And I always wonder when I'm walking down the hall, I still hear people say, well, you got the job because. And I earned this job. I feel very good about that. But you still have to sort of fend that part off. And I would say the goods far outweigh the bads. But, there's still it's tough following this in these guys. His foot. He's got big feet. So.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
One of the things about family businesses is that they are family. And as I was listening to Laura, I was thinking to myself that when we evaluate business and entrepreneurship and change and all those things, we tend to look at it as a business kind of thing. I mean, for those of you who are students, you're being trained in how to run businesses and grow businesses and change businesses. But family businesses have another aspect to them, which is the family. And one of the things I was thinking about is, for those of you who are thinking about family businesses, particularly you students who I suspect many, if not all of you, don't have children yet, having a business which keeps your children close to you is an enormous difference in lifestyle. And my guess is, again, that those of you who are students have gone away from your families to come here and will probably end up someplace that is not where your family is. And you know, that's part of life. I'm not criticizing it, but if by having a family business you can combine the two things, it's a gigantic advantage. And the second comment I want to make, though, again, Laura has been referring to this at the end of what she was saying, is I'm going to speak first about myself now. I've never applied for a job. I've never been in an interview where I was asking for the job. I got hired because I was the boss's son. That was my resume. Actually, I think if you had written down my resume, I mean, I had a fancy education and all that stuff, but nobody would have hired me. That means when you come into a situation like that you are automatically stepping into the shadow of the people who preceded you. And that is a very difficult thing to do. Laura has referred to that for her. I had it too. I happen to be very lucky in that my father was really good at letting me grow and succeed. I've seen lots of friends of mine who went to work for fathers who do not do that. And that's a bad thing. So, you know, I don't think I'm as good at that as my father was, but I've tried to emulate my father. I did have a good teacher. But for those of you who come from family businesses or are thinking about creating a family business, you'll have the same thing. And you know, I've gotten to the point now. I mean, I've had my own successful career, so I don't mind saying, well, I got my job because I was the boss's son. But at the beginning, I minded it. I mean, it was true, so I couldn't deny it. But I wanted to establish my record, and Laura wants to establish her record. And she does things differently than I did. And I have to be able to make myself step back and say, it's her time now, let her do it her way.
Sometimes I have to kick him a little bit to get that to happen.
So I'm just saying, for those of you who are certainly come from families with family businesses, it's something to think about. I'm not sure I know exactly what to tell you to think, but it is an additional problem that just sits there. And when Laura said we're one of the few people who have made it to the 5th generation, or few companies, I think this is a really important reason why companies don't make it from one generation to another. It's one reason. There's other reasons, of course. Talent is different. Your children, children are not the same as their parents. Some are more talented, some are less talented. But it's just an important thing to think about.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, even though you did things differently, both of you experienced significant success with Giant Eagle in terms of growth during both of your leadership. So that can't be disputed. But moving on away from like the company overview over to remaining competitive, I just touched on, and I know David touched on earlier, being a market leader for so long in a very competitive and fierce industry, how were you in each of your times able to identify when it was the right time to go all in for growth strategy, and how were you able to do that without putting the business at significant risk? If that makes sense. So when was the inflection point of when it was like, hey, we got to shake things up and actually?
Can I answer that?
Please, I don't know how to answer it, so you do it.
So I heard a wonderful quote, actually, from one of our directors who was quoting one of our former independent directors. And I am not a golfer, so I may butcher this. But the quote was something along the lines of, you start off the tee, you think you're going to play your 9-iron. You get up to where the ball is and you realize it's a different lie than you thought. So you switch to your 5-iron. And I think, I don't know that there's a way to predict, or there's no, for me, there's no model that says now is the time to invest and now is not the time to invest. Okay. I think you have to read what's in front of you. And, right now, as an example, as we all know, the debt markets are bad. I tend to be more conservative today about how we're spending capital than I would have been when interest rates were essentially zero. So I think that you just have to read what's in front of you. Mm-hmm. One of the things that he has always said to me is, job number one of a leader is to wake up every day, see what's changed, and say, how is that going to affect my business and how do I need to react to that? The second thing is to make decisions. You have to make decisions. You have to have the confidence, even with imperfect data. We will never have perfect data, to make a decision. And the third is the confidence to know when you made a wrong decision to change it. And I think if you do that, and read the where the ball is, and have confidence that you can make good decisions, and if you make a mistake, you can do something about it. You're never going to be perfect all the time, but you set yourself up to be able to change as the environment changes.
Right.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yep.
When I joined the company, my father sat me down on the other side of his desk, and he said, David, I want to give you a piece of advice. I said, what's that? He said, I want you to take risks. So I said, what does that mean? And he said, I want you to think about it this way. If at the end of the year, you can look back at your past year's performance and say to yourself that you didn't make any mistakes, then you didn't take enough risks. And he said, do you get it? And I said, yes, I think I get it. And then my father, he had this little twinkle he would get in his eye, and he got that twinkle, and he said, just don't make too many mistakes.
That's funny. Well, Laura, you touched on the role of a CEO, waking up, seeing what's going on in the news, and how that affects your business. I actually woke up this morning and saw an article about Kroger and Albertsons potentially trying to merger for roughly about $25 billion or so. I hope I'm not throwing you off guard right now, but would love to know your input on how that affects you all, your opinion on it, I know they're doing congressional hearings all week, so yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of turmoil about this proposed merger.
Yes.
Which is obviously industry shaking.
Yes.
For me, it says a couple of things, some of which are scary and some of which are huge opportunities. So one thing it points out for sure in our industry is that scale matters. And it's not that smaller players, and we're relatively, we're not teeny, but compared to those guys, we're pretty small. There's still lots of money to be made, but there's going to be less because they're going to have a huge cost advantage versus us. Huge cost advantage versus us. So scale does matter. The offset to that is really big companies, of which I've worked in 2, are bureaucratic, slow, hard to get things done, and what we have is the advantage of being big enough that we've got plenty of money to invest, but small enough that we can really get stuff done. And we're quite agile. Really quite agile. And we actually get one of the knocks on us from the management team, Paul will know this, is that we try to do too many things. And the reason we try to do too many things is because we can't. And what I think about in terms of scale is we have to outsmart them. We have to outsmart them. So as it relates to things like our capital expenditures, actually, Paul Abbott, who's sitting here, is in charge of our Market District stores, and we're in the process of converting many of our Giant Eagles into Market Districts. So you have to be super smart about how you're going to spend your money. You have to think like an owner. You have to say, look at every single piece of equipment you're going to buy and how it's being installed. And you have to manage it like you're an owner. Kroger doesn't do that because they don't have to. So we have to outsmart them. There is broad speculation. This is a very risky move from a regulatory perspective in terms of whether they'll actually be able to consummate this deal. And there's congressional hearings this week. There are various attorney generals that have brought various lawsuits to not pay the dividend to the Albertsons shareholders. There's a lot of turmoil about this. And it's in a regulatory environment which is not fond of big mergers. So whether this happens or not is yet to be seen. The opportunities it presents, in my mind, are at least twofold. The first one is we don't compete against Albertsons at all. We compete against Kroger primarily in Columbus and in Indiana. And it's a wonderful thing to have a distracted competitor. Because they're not paying any attention at all to what's happening in Columbus. And as we're thinking about investing and growing, we're putting a lot of money into places that they're not paying attention to. And it's going to be, in my opinion, it's at least a 2-year window before this merger gets resolved one way or the other. The other thing is this is going to create, in my opinion, a huge potential wave of consolidation. And I believe, given our strategy, we are in a unique position to be a consolidator. Because there are a lot of companies that are looking around saying, why do I want to compete with those really big guys? I don't have anything special. We actually have a series of unique competitive advantages, and we're big enough that we actually can be a consolidator. And I don't know how much you guys pay attention to sort of rumors on Wall Street, but there's a lot of activity that is about to happen in this space. And one of the things I'm spending a lot of time on with my board is, do we want to be a consolidator? And there is risk in that. When you're competing against these behemoths, there's obvious risk in that, and there's a question about, can we be? We have there's risk in buying stuff and integrating it and doing it effectively. But it's also a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
So I look at it and I say, it's not keeping me up at night because it's going to play out the way it's going to play out. And, I want to take advantage of the opportunities while not making too many mistakes.
And the last one you talked about, you use adjectives like outsmart, being small enough to like make change quickly, which are all revolved around like innovation, which is awesome to hear. I was just going to ask about during the pandemic, how were you able to kind of like leverage those characteristics of Giant Eagle through the pandemic and kind of like lessons learned? So it could be, positive lessons, constructive lessons, but some of the lessons learned that you have from the pandemic.
Well, the pandemic was obviously a horrible thing.
Obviously.
For our company, though, it was transformational. And first of all, because we were an essential business and we were open.
Yeah.
So our business grew literally 100% overnight.
It
And
grew 100%.
Not 100%.
it grew
It grew a lot.
It grew a lot, Dad. It grew a lot. And what it caused us to do was, Paul will remember this, we closed our office.
Okay.
And we said, anyone who is not paying bills or sourcing product, you're going to the stores. And which was actually a fantastic experience. And it was fantastic from a number of perspectives. One is being close to the business. I was a cashier for 6 weeks. I was not very good at it. And it gave me a new appreciation. I really was not very good at it. Actually,
Wait, during the pandemic, you were a cashier?
oh yeah, it was all hands on deck. This was,
Oh, wow.
my kids were, everyone was working.
Okay.
Because
Not me.
if you had been willing, well, if you had not been in a compromised physical position, if you were younger, I would have made you work. That's what I'm trying to say. But it was all hands on deck, and so we all went to the stores.
Yeah.
And so what it made me realize, and I'm sure that every single team member has a story like this, when you're standing there trying to help a customer, and you're dealing with technology which is not intuitive by any stretch of the imagination, and in some cases is really stupid, you realize what your frontline folks go through. And you can start solving problems that are real as opposed to, when you sit in the ivory tower and things that actually don't really make a difference. So one was getting into the stores. We've actually permanently closed our office because we realize we have a lot of real estate. And if people need meeting space, it's good to meet in the stores. I actually got a question at our annual shareholders meeting about, well, how do vendors come and sell product to you? And it used to be on Tuesdays and Thursdays, our lobbies were filled with manufacturers, salespeople with all their samples and stuff. Now we meet in the stores and you can actually look at what they're trying to sell on the shelf, which kind of makes a lot of sense as opposed to looking at it over a desk. So we've closed the office. I would say two other things. One is it made us really focus on what's important to the business, because there wasn't time to do all the other stuff. So we focused on three things. One was keeping people safe. The second was getting product on the shelves. And the third was trying to do right by our communities. And that's it. And if it didn't fit into those three things, we just stopped it. And what you realize is that there's a lot of crap that goes on when you sit in an office that is not important at all. It's started to creep back in. We're doing the best that we can to keep some of it out. But when you're an entrepreneur, as I said before, you like to try stuff. So when you have a little bit more bandwidth, stuff does start to creep in. But the vast majority of it you don't need. And what's important is taking care of the customer. And the last thing I'll say on the small agile thing is we were able to pivot in terms of our supply much faster than our competitors. So as an example, one of the things that happened was you couldn't buy in the normal procurement channels fresh meat or fresh chicken. But the food service world, because restaurants were all closed, had an enormous amount of fresh meat and fresh chicken. We used our local contacts with U.S. food service and others to say, we'll buy all the chicken that you have. And it came in a different form than what we typically would sell. But we said, fine, if that's the chicken we can get, that's what we're going to sell. And we were in stock on our fresh business when none of our competitors were. And it was because we used our local connections and were able to say, you just got to change. You got to do it right now. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, I know I have a ton of questions I could get to, but I don't want to be selfish. So at this point, I'm going to open up to the audience and some of my classmates to maybe ask you a few questions. So. Okay, we can start right here and then make our way over.
Hi, my name's Luke. My first job ever was at a grocery store called Kroger.
We'll forgive you. It's a good way to learn what not to do.
And ever since then, I've had a huge interest in the space, and I've worked at a grocery provider over the summer as well. A lot of traditional retailers that did not sell grocery previously are entering the space. You see Target sells more groceries, dollar stores sell groceries, and then tech companies like DoorDash are also entering grocery, so it's becoming a new revenue stream for them. From where you sit as primarily a grocery retailer, does that impact your future strategy and consideration of how you may need to do business in the future?
So, I mean, the simple answer is yes, but I want to just broaden the lens to say that the trend of people wanting to sell food has been going on for a long time. So you guys, most of you are too young, but the generation before you would have eaten 5 nights a week at their family table that their mom probably cooked. The vast majority of that food was bought in traditional supermarkets. And it wasn't until relatively recently that restaurants became a significant part of the total share of stomach, is what we call it. So the first big change was sharing the business with restaurants. Walmart, this has been going on for a while, right? So this gets back to classic strategy, which is, why are you different? Why is it worthwhile coming to a Giant Eagle as opposed to ordering something on DoorDash? So DoorDash can get you groceries, in 20 minutes, but you're going to pay for it. You're not going to pick your own apples. It's questionable what the quality of the meat would be. So you have to sort of say what is your reason to win when all of these people are trying to do similar things that you are doing. And if you keep asking that question and keep investing, really being specific and focused on your points of difference, they don't scare me. That doesn't mean I don't respect them. And I actually had a conversation today about doing more business with DoorDash because they can fill a need that we can't today. If you do what you do and you do it really, really, really well, you can survive and thrive in an ever increasingly competitive world.
Okay, can I jump in there? Because I wanted to follow up on the Albertsons question.
That's all right.
I don't believe that bigness equates with goodness. I don't believe that bigness equates with survival either. And I thought I'd just tell you a little story about this. When I was on the board at the Mellon Bank, banks were consolidating in the same way that is now going on with the Kroger Albertsons thing. And the chief executive of Mellon, who was a wonderful guy, wonderful businessman, argued that if you didn't get big, you would lose. And the rationale for the argument was that your expense ratio would be too high if you didn't get big. Now, I never quite understood what an expense ratio was, but let's just assume it's a measure of the cost against the revenue. And I remember at a meeting, either I or some other director said to him, Frank, can you give us any evidence that bigger banks have lower cost ratios than smaller banks? And his answer was, no, I can't. So when Laura was talking about there are clear benefits to Kroger if they succeed in getting Albertsons, but there are also clear bad things. I mean, how do you manage a company like that? How much overhead do you need to manage it? And what does it do to your ability to make decisions? What does it actually do to your costs? It's not really that clear. So I would say to you all that if you're thinking of being businesses, of starting business or being in business or joining a business or running a family business, that what Laura is saying is the key, is how are you differentiated? How do you appeal to the customer? And then can you make it work? And I'm sure many of you have been in businesses already. It's hard to make it work. It's real hard to make it work. And the bigger you are, the harder it is. So I actually think that the Kroger-Albertsons deal is good for Giant Eagle. Now, if you go to conventional consultants, they'll all tell you, oh, this is terrifying because they're going to have these huge cost advantages.
Not all of them.
Many do. And there's a very conventional Wall Street thought that that's true. But I just don't believe it.
That's great insight. We have a question in the back.
My name is Pat O'Donnell. I'm actually working here out of the Sports Center with Ron Gabriel Leslie on a direct store delivery automation startup working in the grocery industry. So we're focused on backdoor receiving in grocery stores. And I'm curious if you could speak a bit to how innovation in supply chain, robotics, automation is going to change the way that food gets to your stores and products get to your stores, and then how they ultimately get to your customers.
Interesting. So, first of all, I'd love to know more about what you're doing.
Love to chat.
I will tell you that the backdoor receiving process is probably the most outdated thing that the industry has. No one has really figured that out. But you obviously have gotten onto the right concept. Here's what I would say. I think that the reality is, with a labor market like ours, we right now are running at about a 10% vacancy rate. And what that means is we're not running the stores as well as we could. Stuff is not, either people are getting burnout or stuff isn't getting done the way that we would like it to get done. I think our vacancy rate is actually slightly better than our competitors. But we're all dealing with this. And I don't see that changing for the foreseeable future, particularly in things like people don't want to be butchers anymore. It's hard to find a cake decorator. So in an environment where you still want to have hand-decorated cakes, or at least customizable decorated cakes, and you can't hire, you have to figure out different solutions. I don't know that I haven't seen yet a scalable technology that is going to replace a butcher. There's lots of people working on it. Someone will figure that out. One example of a technology that is coming into its own are electronic shelf labels. How shelf labels get printed when you're dealing with a store that has 60,000 SKUs is complicated and expensive. I believe electronic shelf labels are probably 2 generations away from really being scalable and durable enough to survive. But those kinds of things are going to start taking hold. Another real example would be self-checkout. So 15 years ago, when we started putting in self-checkout lanes, there was like a revolt. And people were talking about, it's going to replace jobs and all this kind of stuff. Well, the reality is you'd rather have a self-checkout than not be able to check out at all. So those types of things are coming. I don't know yet, as it relates to the broad food supply chain. When you're talking about growing lettuce in California, the cost of shipping that lettuce across the US is actually more than the worth of the lettuce itself. At some point, someone is going to figure out how to make vertical farming or micro fulfillment centers work, so you can grow stuff closer to your actual stores. That solution, there's lots of people working on it. I know that you know that. There's not yet a success model that says this is the winner. There's actually there's a local failure. But there's lots of people working on it. So long-winded way of saying, in a labor environment like ours, there are going to have to be automation and technology solutions to start doing the work of jobs that you can't fill. Just to take a little sideline, I don't know if you guys know this, but we are a major investor actually in a robotics company called Seegrid, which is a warehouse.
Where we have a representative here.
We do? Oh my God, hi. I keep looking past you because Paul Abbott is sitting right behind you. And I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you. But yes, so we're a major investor in Seegrid, which is a warehouse automation technology that started with essentially automated pallet, we call them tuggers, that move pallets from one place to the other. We've recently launched a lift truck, which is pretty cool and opens up a whole new set of use cases. So we believe it's coming enough that we're heavily invested in it's not a startup anymore, but a young company. It's just not quite there yet.
All right, Usman right here in the front.
I'm Sana, taking the family business course with Professor Meredith. So in my case studies of 2 family business, there came like a lot of power struggle within one family. So you're dealing with 5 families. How is there like no power struggle or
It requires supremely good personal skills.
For all the family members?
Actually, yes. A great example, just going back to something that my dad was mentioning, the company for a very long time had a very strong principle that any major decision would be made unanimously. That doesn't work anymore.
No.
So the change, in order to move from a place where you can sit in a room with 5 people and make a decision to it's a really big company and you have to make decisions and not everyone's going to agree. Everyone has to be willing to work through that together. So yes, it really is across all of it. But it's a lot of negotiating.
That's a good question. Okay, right behind.
Could you talk about the Advantage program, which appears to be changing, and I don't understand that from a consumer standpoint?
Sure. So I think you're talking about what was Fuel Perks and is now turning into My Perks.
I guess.
Okay. So Giant Eagle has a 2-decade-old, very, very, very strong, actually with firm evidence, world-class loyalty program, which is anchored on the Advantage card. Yep. It started as a way to incent people that if they bought gas, they would get discounts off groceries. It evolved into it going both ways, where there was incentive if you bought food, you would get, it went both ways is what I'm trying to say. What we figured out is the program, while enormously successful, was very expensive, and it did not appeal to everyone. And I'll give you an example. If you didn't have a big car or you didn't drive, there was no value in that program for you. People that had smaller households found it to be much less valuable. And we started losing those customers to other places because it's such a big part of our value equation, and we weren't talking to everyone. The concept of the change was to allow us to change it into a currency-based program, which I'm happy to talk more about. But the idea being that we could use the currency to personalize offers, so that we can figure out if you are not a big driver, we could offer you more discounts on groceries, so that you would get something different than the person sitting next to you in a way that would be meaningful to you. I would say that part of it is still in evolution. I think there's a lot of merit in the concept. I also think it is a complicated program, and it may be too complicated. It may be too complicated, so we might make some changes to it. But I think going back to our points of difference and our rights to win, the notion of tying together our various formats, our pharmacy, our supermarket, our get-goes, with a loyalty program that allows us to get rewards to people in ways that matter to them, is a significant competitive advantage that Meijer doesn't have. Kroger has a fuel program, but it only goes one way, and it's not very rich. Sheetz doesn't have it. Really, no one else in our space has it. So it's a huge advantage, and we're going to keep evolving it to meet the needs of our customers. And I'm not sure that we've totally got this iteration right, but we're going to keep trying.
Can I add something to that? Part of these questions that you showed us in advance are how do you do technological change, and how do you change as the environment changes? One of the fascinating parts of our business is that once we introduced the Advantage card, which most of our customers have, if not all of them, we now have information about what the customers do. So the question that we have been facing for years, this is not new now, is how do we harness that information to help the customers and thereby to help ourselves? And that's some of the things that Laura is working on now. Well, I'll just leave it at that. It's a gigantic intellectual question. And then, of course, once you figure out how you want to use it, then you have to actually make it work. So just as an example, if you are a Pepsi-Cola customer and the person sitting next to you is a Coca-Cola customer, we could offer you a deal on Pepsi and you a deal on Coke. Particularly if we can establish an electronic communication with you. So the question is, how do you do that? What is it that customers want as a reward? And then how do you actually make it work in practice? And being in this room just reminds me, when I was still working, we were trying to recruit people from Carnegie Mellon. And one day, I came down to make a presentation to students who might be interested in working for Giant Eagle. And it was perfectly clear to me that the students thought that we were this prosaic industry that had nothing to do with what they were learning. And nothing is further from the truth. But our job is to convince people like you that this is a very interesting and stimulating opportunity with lots of change coming and lots of opportunity for people. Now, I didn't come here to make a recruiting speech, but, the image of our business needs to change.
Well, just to build on that, so my son, who's the sophomore at Amherst, had an internship at Giant Eagle last summer in the merchandising department. And it was great because we're working from home. So he was working in what is basically our TV room, and I'm in our home office, and it's about 6 feet away. So I heard everything he was doing, which was actually a wonderful way to learn what actually happens in the company, which is not always what you think. But so at the end of the summer, I was like, so what advice do you have for me? He said, you should make everyone gamers. So the way he communicates with his friends is he's got his headsets on, he's got friends all over the country, and they game together. And they're digital natives in a way that you and I don't even get that. But that is a real thing. And he's like, if you want to modernize the company and you want to figure out how to have people talk to each other, you should hire gamers. I was like, that is kind of an interesting idea, but that I would not have thought of. So by the way, a funny addendum to that story is I went to our chief information officer, who's a wonderful guy. He's about 57 years old. And we actually were in Bangalore, where we have an office of about 350 people now, and most of whom are digital natives. And I said, Kirk, we need to be hiring digital natives. And he said, I'm a digital native. I said, Kirk, you're 60 years old. By definition, you can't be a digital native. He goes, I am. I'm telling you I am. And then I said, okay, are you a gamer? He said, oh, yes. I'm like, really? So, I think that the sort of, to build on what you were saying, and again, to go back to the question about how do you pivot and how do you change? Mm-hmm. I mean, the reality is people talk to each other differently today than the way I grew up and even the way that you guys grew up. It's changing all the time. So our job is to figure out how to keep up with that in a way that keeps us relevant. And I know that Kroger would say exactly the same thing, but we are both a food retailer. We're also not an IT company, actually in a very significant way.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one question that's more family related, and then I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So going to the family aspect of the family business, have you ever had to remove a family member from the business? Whether it's
Can I take this?
Whether it's your family or one of the other 4 family members, which would be very interesting. And if so, how did you go about doing that? Did they have equity in the company? Like, please feel free to use all the discussion you want on talking through that dynamic.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay.
He's laughing because in sort of the older generations, I would say that they used some relatively draconian measures to figure out how to deal with people in the company that weren't as competent. What we have now is something that for at least 2 generations has worked extremely well for us. It is a policy that says any family member can have a job that they are qualified for, that is open. We're not going to make jobs for people. They get paid at market rates, and they can't work for another family member. And in my tenure, we have family members that have gotten demoted, have gotten removed from the company, because we treat them, I think you could argue, we treat them actually more rigorously than a normal non-family member team member. And it served us well because we're consistent about it. So I don't get the calls that said, hey, how about my kid?
Yeah.
Because they know what the answer is. And it works very well for us. It didn't always work that way. In past generations, the reason I think my dad was laughing, there were actually times when we paid people to stay home. I bet that's what you were thinking about.
That crossed my mind.
And again, it goes back to that you have to be a supreme negotiator. You have to be a politician. But the principle that we have now that we have stuck to has served us extremely well.
Like written governance, yeah.
I don't know that it's written anywhere, but everyone knows it.
Okay.
Yes, but the reason I was smiling is actually I did think of the example she was talking about, but the answer to your question is yes, of course it happens.
Yeah.
And if you have a family business, you have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And you have to be conscious of where nepotism is rearing its ugly head, which it does. Mm-hmm. And you just have to be prepared to deal with it the best way that you can.
But the more clear you are, for those of you who are going into family businesses, about the governance of how you want to deal with it, and the more rigorously you stick to it, the better off you are.
Okay, thank you for that. I was gonna go right here. Yeah.
I'm Patrick, I'm an MBA student. You mentioned that this is a business where choosing your vendors and suppliers is very important. I'm currently in an operations class where we're working with a local ice cream company that's kind of struggling with that, how to manage your different vendors, selecting them, kind of doing quality assurance. And I'm kind of curious if you could speak to how you think about choosing your vendors and suppliers.
Ooh, I actually have an expert in the room on that exact subject named Paul Abbott. So I'll try, and then Paul, if you want to jump in, you know much more about this than I do. So the way the industry works is you're going to carry the Procter & Gamble products. You just are. You can't not be in our business and not carry Tide. You have to carry Bounty paper towels. The game with the big manufacturers is to use to negotiate them off each other, essentially, to make sure that you're getting good costs and that you're getting your fair share of the trade dollars, because there's a lot of money that goes into promoting their products. And our merchants spend an enormous amount of time thinking about, with the really big guys, how do you do that in such a way that's most advantageous to the company? The second answer is one of our key differentiators is we carry a wide assortment. So for example, in pasta, I think we probably have 11 brands of pasta. It might even be more than that. We do that because if you happen to care about brand number 9 and you can't get it at Walmart, you'll come to our store for that. One of the trade-offs there is the cost of the inventory and the cost of the space. So there's a constant dynamic about how do you make the choices about, well, maybe 11 is too many, maybe you could get away with 8. And then the last thing, which is really differentiating for us, which Paul is a real expert in, is how do you carry local vendors? There's the benefit of being in the community is we should be carrying products that are made by the community. And doing business with a really big company is really hard for small vendors. There's all sorts of things we make them go through with insurance policies and quality testing and all that kind of stuff that if you're a little guy is daunting at best and expensive. So what Paul has done is created a pathway for small local vendors to get on shelf. And we think that's a huge competitive advantage. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Paul?
The only thing that might be worth adding is very often small and local is where there is a lot of white space and a lot of real innovation that adds category growth, and you can get really good at that, right? So the big companies, it's on every shelf in every store you can imagine. But these local vendors or innovation-based vendors do offer something that the faster we act, the bigger the advantage is for us, and the nimble we can be. And very often, we actually are learning that some of our local suppliers are actually disrupting the categories to the point where they're inch for inch of shelf space outperforming the biggest brand you can think of. And
Wow.
But it took a lot of commitment to dealing with the difficulties of it. And we believe in it. It turns out that it is well worth it, and not only for us and our guests, but for our communities and the entire economic region as a result.
So a great example of that, which is Paul's doing, speaking of ice cream, is Leona's. You guys know Leona's brand? Do you guys like Leona's?
Yes.
Okay, I like Leona's. And actually, Paul introduced them to me. You can't buy Leona's at Aldi. You can't buy Leona's at Walmart. You can't buy it at Meijer or CVS or any of those places, and it's a really good product. So being able to carry stuff like that is a trip driver for us. So it's a great question. I'm happy to get you connected with Paul.
Thank you.
In the back, we'll do those two, probably our last questions, so you first.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. My name is Becca. I'm a part-time MBA, but I also work full-time for United Natural Foods. Earlier, Laura, you had talked about finding mentors when you went out to P&G. And just for both of you, like obviously you have a built-in mentor in your family, but what do you look for in terms of additional mentorship to sort of come into your own?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I think I'm going to answer it by saying one of the things I didn't mention about being a good CEO and a good leader, and I would recommend this to anyone, is you have to be a curious, continuous learner. And you can get ideas from non-conventional places by connecting dots that other people aren't seeing. So one thing you should do is read anything you can get your hands on that has maybe had nothing relevant, seemingly, to the business that you're in. And you can find experts who will look at your business with a different lens, and they can see things often that you can't. So one of the things I've tried to do is, one of the reasons I joined Brookings Institute and Council on Foreign Relations and other areas like that, is when you have really smart people who are expert in something that is not necessarily directly related to what you do, they'll see around corners in ways that your peers won't. A great example of this that I once heard, we got really interested in Toyota production system about 10 years ago. And UPMC got interested in it at about the same time. And one of the ways the folks who were trying to improve the quality of outcomes in the ER, what they did is they went and they studied NASCAR pit crews. And if you think about it, the coordination in real time in a life or death situation, and how do you make sure all those parts come together in the right way? But so most people would say, what do NASCAR pit crews have to do with an ER? But if you think about it from a different lens, there's a lot to be learned from that. And so what I would encourage you guys to do is be naturally curious about stuff that may not directly seem like it connects to what you do, and then find experts that are willing to invest the time, because they'll learn as much from you as you will learn from them, and talk to them. And just talk to them. It's actually quite a lot of fun.
I think we have one last question, Anderson.
Yeah, thank you very much both for taking time. My name is Anderson. I'm a second-year MBA, and I own a hot sauce brand called Big O's brand, where for every bottle we distribute, I give a pound of produce that I grow in my garden to the local food shelter. But the fact of the matter is, this is a small hot sauce brand. When I'm, making the hot sauce, it's just me and my co-founder in the kitchen, and it's really hard, the making process. And so if you could kind of speak to any suggestions or tips regarding, I know you worked in the cheesecake process, so kind of how do you scale during the making process, without a lot of capital?
So this is actually somewhere where I think that the Pittsburgh ecosystem is not as good as it needs to be because there's not a lot of shared maker space yet. And if you go to a Boston or a Palo Alto or those places, there are places you could go play around with scaling. How do you scale a hot sauce company? I think what I would, never having scaled a hot sauce company, but drawing from my experience with Sara Lee is, what I would do is find other entrepreneurs that have started from their kitchens and say, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? My bet is there's a network within CMU that yeah, so I mean, that's the best advice I have, to go from kitchen to production facility. You definitely want to make sure you have the right engineering skills, because manufacturing at scale, going from a kitchen to a manufacturing facility is a very different thing. And there is real science to that. So I would make sure you get the right engineering skills around you. And then I'd find space and start trying stuff.
Yeah, I think we have time for one last one.
Okay, I'll just keep it broad then. So as you could probably hear from the audience, there's a very entrepreneurial spirit here at Carnegie Mellon, whether it's like a hot sauce company or I know myself, I'm interested in acquiring a small business and running it post graduation. What is some final advice that you have for the students here today? It could be related to entrepreneurship, it could be related to leadership, it could be related to dealing with people, blank canvas. What's just some general advice you would love to impart on us? David, you can start first if you want.
Go for it.
Go for it. Okay. Easy enough.
I think what I'd repeat what I said before about have confidence in yourself and make decisions and have the confidence to know that not all of them are going to be right, and then have the confidence to change them. And that sort of relates to, in order to be a successful leader in whatever pursuit you take, you have to have enough of an ego to believe in yourself, but not too much ego, so that you can understand that you're not always right. And I think, to me, finding the balance between those two things is one of the marks of a real leader. You have to be good, you have to know enough in yourself that you can make the call. But you also have to know enough in yourself to say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I'll fix it. And those two things don't always go together beautifully. But managing that tension is, I think, unbelievably important.
Well, thank you. Please give a last round of applause.